Welcome, welcome very much to Conversation. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program a dear friend of mine from way back, a long time we've been associated with each other, and that's Antoney Gronowicz. He's a historian, and he's got a very interesting take on things political in terms of the current situation, and he's got a lot to say about what's going on politically on the planet. And Tony, welcome so much to Conversation.
Thank you, Harold. It's been 12 years.
Oh, it hasn't been 12 years.
12 years since the previous millennium. What am I saying, 12 years? It's been...
Oh, I thought you were talking about our last program.
I'm talking about 22 years.
From
first time 1996.
96. Well, oh, you mean the first time we did a program?
That's right.
You kept better see?
Well, you've got a lot of people on your show, so...
About 5,000. I mean,
it's hard to keep track.
But anyway, some of the best is the program's done with this fellow named Antoney Gronowicz. And Tony, welcome so much.
Thank you, Harold.
We had a recent election going. We want to talk about the political situation, and we had a real upset sort of thing that just was announced a couple of weeks ago or so. And maybe that's the thing that we could talk about. Maybe you could bring that up. This young lady won all against the odds of what ought to have been the case, and maybe there's some meaning to that, or maybe that's a way to key off.
Well, that's a definite upset, and shall we say an earthquake in the sense that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez upset the Queen's party boss, who had been in power for many years, since the previous millennium, and he had been appointed by the previous party boss, Manton, and there wasn't even an election in the district. He came to power. He listed his address as Queens, but lived in D.C., sent his kids to private school, his license, everything.
Yeah.
And he didn't take her seriously until it was too late.
What, some young lady coming along,
and she is 3 generations in her family is 3 generations in that district, which encompasses Astoria and eastern Bronx, Pelham, and never happened such a upset because she was running a grassroots campaign. She was appealing to the needs of the current generation, whose economic future is pretty bleak given what's happened to the economy for the average person. We've never recovered from the 2008 economic recession, which was the worst since the Depression.
That's very interesting.
And she was out there. The demographics of the community changed. And she got the young vote. And she was a Sanders supporter. She actually was an intern for Teddy Kennedy way back when. She's 28 years old.
Young,
and very dynamic, and great personality, great charisma, a wonderful smile. She was out there all the time.
And what was her name again?
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
She must have been from Poland, right?
Right, from Puerto Rico.
I'm making
Puerto Rico, man.
I'm trying to add
that's okay. Well, this is serious stuff, and I'm enjoying it very much because Puerto Rico was devastated, and is still devastated. It is still devastated.
It really was.
And just today, FEMA said, they're going to give the many families, hundreds of families who are displaced, 3 more weeks to be in the improvised housing that they are giving them. So. We're not dealing with the needs of the population here, and their needs are jobs, education, health care, housing, and the environment. And that is what the issues are. I'm talking about the U.S.
Okay, go ahead.
And that's why she went out, she campaigned, she door knocked, and spoke to people. That's how you have to do it.
But Mr. Trump was doing very, very well in his own lights and everything like that, and he's got a huge following.
Plus she calls herself a socialist, which is important, because Bernie Sanders resurrected that terminology from the Cold War and has a long and honorable tradition addressing the needs of the people, achieving some kind of equity in the society, some kind of respect for human beings and their needs, which is missing from the machine politics where the boss decides and people follow like sheep to the polls. That's why participation in elections is very low.
Well,
in this one, it was also low.
Yeah,
but the people who were mobilized and galvanized and excited about her candidacy got out there and voted. So that made the difference.
Yeah, and it was amazing how much he attracted in the election with Hillary was involved and Mr. Bush and Mr. Trump and everything. He had a huge ability to bring out huge crowds.
Well, he
would announce a crowd in a weekend, and there would be hundreds of thousands of people.
Well, I don't know if hundreds of thousands, but the point
really
is, listen, if we're talking about Trump now.
No, I was talking about Mr. What's his name? The socialist, Bernie Sanders.
Oh, Bernie Sanders, yes.
Oh,
but
Trump was a master.
Well,
absolute master.
But Bernie Sanders was totally ignored by the mass media, the false news. They were pushing Hillary.
But not by a whole lot of people who would flock to him if he gave a talk.
Look, the people under 30 who voted in the Democratic primary, 84% of them voted for Bernie Sanders.
Is that true?
84%. Well, that's I'm a political historian.
Yeah, right.
And that's those are the demographics of that election. And then when he didn't get the nomination, his mobilized base just stayed home. They were not attracted to Hillary's style. She took everyone for granted. She didn't campaign in Wisconsin. I think we've been down this road already.
I think so.
Many times.
You and I, you mean.
I think one of our, well, all of us, I should think.
Well, she had a hand in bombing and killing my guy Muammar Gaddafi. I know that. Yeah.
Well, don't forget, under Obama, she did that in 2011.
Yeah, I'm hip.
And then they overthrew the government in Honduras in 2009.
Yeah.
So their focus is foreign policy.
Yeah.
And our foreign policy, our very expensive foreign policy, we have the largest military budget on the planet, higher than the next several countries put together. And it's designed to rule the world. And the rest of the world does not want to be ruled by the United States.
Well, do you think
and the
that's
attitude,
true?
yes. Well,
that is true?
That is true, of course.
But a lot of people want to come here.
They want to come here if their countries have been bombed, dictatorships have been installed, as in the case of Honduras.
That's true.
That little girl on the front page of Time magazine with Trump looming over her was a refugee from Honduras. It's an international disgrace that you treat children this way. No other country in the world treats children as badly as those children were.
Well, they got rogue people running those countries. 3 of them, Guatemala and that. It was terrible what's going on.
Well, of course it is. Of course.
Or look at what the people coming out of Africa.
Well, they've been bombed. You bomb Libya, you're going to have refugees.
Yeah, and they're coming.
You bomb Syria, you're going to have refugees. You bomb Iraq, you're going to have refugees. It's a no-brainer.
Well,
and if you have NAFTA, which helped the mega corporations, the legacy of NAFTA was immigration from Mexico. There wasn't that kind of immigration prior, but Monsanto, GMOs, Frankenseeds.
You mean agriculture?
Yes.
Yeah, seeds,
The seeds that are controlled by these giant corporations destroyed the Mexican peasant economy. And the people came north. Well, that's how it works. So it's a direct result of NAFTA, because you didn't have the immigration from Mexico before NAFTA, and that's what's going on.
Well, Mr. Trump's on the television all the time saying everything's going great.
Well, he can say what he wants. He's the president. He has the media at his beck and call.
All the leaders and the leading indicators of the economy and all that are just sky high.
Well, what do you mean leading? So what does that mean? For who? If you own stocks, yes, but
for the overall
minority
economy,
No. The statistics about unemployment are manipulated. People who are don't look for work after a certain amount of time. People who are working 2 days a week are not. People working 2 days a week are considered part of the employed. Full-time jobs with full benefits, which is what Bill Clinton promised when he put forward NAFTA in 1993, 94. That was the promise. That didn't pan out. But don't forget, when he made that announcement, he had all the other presidents around him when he did this. He had Bush, he had Carter, he had his vice president, Gore, he had Ford. This was 93. They all were applauding NAFTA. And it's going to make Mexico a first world country, and we're going to have, and Clinton begins with, I'm going to offer a program, full-time jobs with full benefits. Well, none of that came to pass.
No, it's
and what happened was Bush War, doubling the military budget to conquer Iraq under false pretenses, and we had economic collapse. All right, so we go to the present. And the present is there are too many people and too few well-paying jobs. And that's the problem.
In the world,
and there's not enough in the world and also in this country.
And is it a trend?
It's a trend. Of course it's a trend.
It's
because
a trend that's going to get worse?
Of course it's going to get worse. It is getting worse as we speak.
Yeah.
The technology that we have replaces people.
Wait a minute. Do you realize how significant that is? If that is the case, and let's just
well, it is the case.
Is there a couple of attendant sentences to that or something, or that's a huge issue?
Look,
because they can say you can create jobs, and
well,
if they create jobs, then people.
But
get
it doesn't
middle
say
class
what kind of
and all
jobs.
Yeah.
The point is that the jobs of the 50s, let's say making cars, there were no robots in the factories, and a guy making a car could have, his wife didn't have to work. He could have a car in his garage, maybe in a house, send his kids to college. That's no longer possible today. That's the 50s.
Yeah, right.
Well, because no country sacrificed so little and gained so much from the Second World War as the United States. So that was the largesse from not having any physical damage to your infrastructure. Whereas a lot of other countries.
I was in Detroit during that, and they'd come out of the Second World War.
Right.
And when I was young, I was born in 35, so it was right in the 30s, and there was nothing, and the war was raging, and there was this guy Adolf Hitler. He was pretty grim, and they were fighting that, and there was no production of anything for the people. No automobiles, no refrigerator. It was nothing but bombs and weapons and everything.
Well, yes,
to fight the
and it never stopped thereafter. After World War I, there was demobilization of the military, and you had the consumer industry, the radios, the automobile, the phonograph, and of course the car culture, the mass production of cars.
Detroit had to do with the cars.
Yes, of course. Ford. But after the Second World War, it was all military. Because as you can see from the 20-year-old map up there,
behind
actually almost 30-year-old map.
You're the only one who could have spotted that.
Well, it's the Soviet Union, and they built up the entire war machinery to reverse what was going.
8.5 million square miles, I think.
I think it's more than that, but maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point being that Russia today is both a European and an Asian country.
Yeah,
and geography is everything. The U.S. was geographically isolated, which protected it from conventional warfare, meaning Army and Navy.
Is that map accurate, do you think? I'm a geographer. I'm not sure. Is that accurate? Look at the size of the Soviet Union.
Well, it's big, but it's not.
Look at how huge. Look at little old America.
Well, that's the Mercator distortion, man.
Here's America. Look at that little thing.
Right.
Here's the Soviet. How do I get? I can't get to. You have to do it.
Right. All right. I can do it.
Put your finger around. Look at the size of that.
Well, it's 11 time zones today.
Yeah.
So the point being that the Second World War turned out differently than the Anglo-Americans were expecting. They expected the Germans to beat the Soviet army, and the Soviet army, because of the Soviet organization, revolutionary fervor, and Holy Mother Russia, combined very cleverly, motivated the population to fight to the death against the Germans. And though they suffered tremendous casualties, 27 million killed when they were invaded by by an army of 4.5 million on a battlefront that is 1,900 miles long from northern Maine to Key West, Florida. That was the battlefront. And they were beaten.
What are you talking about? I'm sorry, I don't
Second World War, when Hitler and his allies, the battlefront was 1,500 miles or so, maybe 1,900.
Comparable
to the distance of Maine to Key West. Yes. I'm sorry, I left out a link in the chain here.
That was.
So that's what happened. Yeah. That's what happened.
So where do we stand and everything? I think they've put forth a lot of things. We still have faith. You got a division between the left and the right, I guess, and everything. You have capitalism, right? It's come out of history. And then you have what's called socialism, or the left and the right.
Well,
that
in order
still
to have
holds across
socialism,
the
you
planet.
first have to have capitalism. Marx recognized that.
Okay, talk to
But
us.
each revolution is bigger than the previous revolution.
Yeah.
So you had the
economy's
English
bigger.
Revolution,
Yeah.
which decapitated the king. You had the French Revolution, which decapitated the king and the queen, but mobilized
1789.
much more of the population. Then you had the Russian Revolution, which was a consequence, in large part, of the First World War. And then the attempt to roll back communism led to the building up of Hitler in the West, because Hitler was not opposed so long as he marched east. And if you read Mein Kampf,
Yeah.
you will say that I'm counting, he writes on page 139, 140 of Mein Kampf, that I'm counting on the English not to do anything. As long as I march east, everything is fine. They will support me. He even says in that passage there that it was a shame for Germany to even industrialize. We should have let the English industrialize while we move east to get land for the German folk.
Well, the English
Yeah.
did kind of industrialize. The United States certainly.
Well, what
industrialized.
I'm
It became
saying
the
is that
arsenal of
that
democracy,
that
yeah.
Germany was looking to England for not doing anything, and they didn't do anything until 1939, when they realized that Hitler was going to, before he moved east, he was going to move west and conquer all of Western Europe, which the Germans had failed to do in the First World War, because they were fighting a two-front war.
Yeah.
And the Kaiser famously said, Paris for lunch, St.
Did he have
Petersburg for dinner.
Yeah.
But it never,
Yeah.
they never got to Paris.
Was there an alternative to that strategy that might have served him better? That being Adolf Hitler.
No, I think
He
given,
made a mistake.
well, the mistake he made was
a
invading.
crucial mistake. Let's say.
The mistake he has made was fundamental. He's invading somebody else's land
Yeah.
to advance his interests. He's stealing from people.
Yeah.
And that, so
And he was
on balance, human beings are good. And that
he
demonstrates that.
And he represented what was the epitome of what it had also, elements of which we had seen in, well, I don't know, Moscone, but also Mussolini in Italy.
Yeah, but
Of
Mussolini,
what is called fascism.
right.
And that had a great appeal. And there's a danger of that now in terms of the
Yes, well,
state
don't
of the
forget
world,
Mussolini
particularly
was
with the
funded
United
by
States.
British intelligence in to keep them in the First
Okay,
World
well,
War.
Was that
A lot of stuff comes out much
geopolitical move?
later. Yes, it
That
was a geopolitical
okay.
move. That's right.
So they're all manipulating things. and
Well, they
everything.
try to manipulate.
Is there still a danger of fascism
I would
in the world?
I would say to some degree, but it's not the same. It's,
Okay.
I mean, history doesn't repeat itself. It does do things similar, depending. Obviously, we're seeing this in the rise of the nationalist fronts in various European countries.
Yeah, and you're a
and
historian.
also,
yeah, you got
but
a
here,
feeling
but
for
the
that, yeah.
demographics here are different.
No.
By 2040, the majority of our population will be African, Asian, and Latinx.
By when? I'm sorry.
2040,
Oh,
the
okay.
majority will be African,
Uh-huh.
Asian, and Latinx, Latinos and Latinas. Okay, and that's
that's men and women. You mean?
yes.
Those male and female.
So
okay,
that's
yeah,
what
yeah.
exactly what happened in Crowley's district. The demographics changed, and he took his constituency for granted. The previous two elections, he didn't have any opposition, and somebody who's working methodically, who's a part of the community, who identifies with the community,
young
who
lady, yeah.
represents the community,
Yeah.
was able to mobilize a host of youthful
It
volunteers.
was a big surprise, wasn't it?
It was
when
a
they announced
terrific
it?
surprise. It
Everybody
was a surprise
surprised.
to her. If you look
Yeah,
at
but yeah, she
if you
didn't
look at
think it was
television,
one-
she
yeah,
didn't think it was
right.
going to happen either, and she beat him soundly, 57 to 42%.
That's like
To
Joan
me,
of
that's
Arc
extremely.
winning, or somebody winning, you know. Although most of the people. don't
However,
win.
that's only one.
Spartacus tried.
That's
to put him
only
up on the-
one.
Yeah.
Well, Spartacus almost won. He almost
Yeah,
won.
but he ended up on the crucifix.
Yes,
yeah.
but that
And there
often
was another
happens.
Guy, Jesus.
But
you
let's
know, he
let's
got
let's
put
refer
up on
back
the
to this.
cross.
This is just one seat out of 435
Yeah,
in the House,
yeah.
and then there's 100 in the Senate.
So
But the
what do
point
you-
is, it
yeah,
was
go ahead.
it was a political earthquake,
Mhm.
and it was an extension of the Sanders campaign, which
thi-
nobody predicted
would
would
have any juice, right?
exactly.
Yeah, because that was just that socialist thing that always comes up. you know.
Well, but the point is,
Yeah.
the students haven't. This generation in their 20s and their 30s have not been brainwashed against socialism, as people were in the 40s and the 50s. And they forgot that the United States...
Help me out here, Tony, because you're a historian, and it's hard to understand history, and it's particularly within a you know, a moving context and everything, because Adolf Hitler, who was a fascist, called his thing National Socialism. So this word socialism, and then the Soviets called it, you know, socialism. So, and then there's, you know, we call her a socialist, or Bernie a socialist.
She's a self-identified socialist.
Yeah, but what? Okay, let's get down to definition of terms. What does it mean to be a socialist?
You're interested in equality. You're interested in satisfying people's basic needs.
You think Hitler
You're not
was
necessarily
in equality. He was calling it National Socialism, or they called it similar to that in Italy with Mussolini.
I understand.
They call it,
it was
Soviet
rallying
Union.
around the leader in the state. It's different in the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union provided people with education, healthcare, housing, and jobs, and it did the same in Eastern Europe.
Soviet Union was better at providing something for the least among us, as they say.
That's correct.
It was.
I mean, it was a horrible situation in Russia before the First World War. And during the First World War, they suffered an immense amount of casualties, but much worse in the Second World War.
This word socialism, is it regular, is it relevant to bring up the word socialism
yes, of
as
course.
something to be advanced by those who want to see a certain kind of political development in
No,
the
they want to
United
see
States
a little
of
more
America?
Equality. There's never been such disparity in wealth.
Develop it out.
Because it's global.
And how do you differentiate between National Socialism in Europe, in Germany, that's called socialism.
No, it's not
and
socialism.
Communism was called socialism, and the socialism of Bernie Sanders. Or how
Socialism,
do you make a
Bernie
distinction
Sanders
word
and the woman who won in the Bronx, Octavia Cruz, and Bronx and Queens.
Is socialism
Democratic
an operative
socialism.
word in
Democratic
the
socialism.
Oh, you
certainly
want to
that was not the.
Democrat?
Well, that's what they say.
Republican socialism?
It doesn't work that way.
You think it doesn't work that way?
No.
Develop
Democratic
the
with a lower case. Okay, but don't forget, we are not technically a democracy. We're a republic. The word democracy is not in our Constitution.
You are a historian.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about the national heritage that we have and that we have to work with as a collective entity and everything.
Well, the fellow who the fellow who mostly wrote the Constitution, Madison.
Was it mostly Madison, not Jefferson?
Jefferson did the Declaration of Independence. Obviously, they had others.
Statement,
but let's go back to the first point about the Constitution.
All right. Well, okay.
The Constitution, in order to defend the Constitution, Madison wrote a number of Federalist papers. Yeah. One of them was Federalist Number 10, in which he said, I am opposed to democracy, and I'm opposed to people making the laws. Yes. What we have is indirect democracy, which you have in a republic. But we only are limited to 435 representatives in the House, so each House member represents almost a million people. If you figure out, if you do that. Well, not a million, let's say hundreds of thousands of people, okay?
Right, okay.
And the point is, they're not interested in having people vote. The minority votes, I think 10%, 15%, 20% of the eligible electorate vote.
Is that is that hold over the long term?
Well, it's been declining, but in a race like the one we just had, you mobilize your base, you win, because the people were not mobilized sufficiently for Crowley. Don't forget, Crowley was fourth in line to run the House of Representatives, to take over perhaps Nancy Pelosi's position.
But spell that out a little bit, would you? The meaning of that. What does that mean? What does that indicate?
He would have been the House Minority Leader, the leader of the minority party, which is the Democratic Party right now. He has been there long enough.
And he was defeated?
Yes, he was defeated. She beat him. She beat him and beat himself. Well, of course that's significant.
That's what they call.
He was the head of the Queen's Democratic Party, and he's defeated.
In the business world, they have a thing called leading indicators.
That's correct.
Of the market. We have leading indicators of the political.
There was, I think, one club in the Bronx that supported her. She didn't have the Democratic Party clubs. She didn't have the support of the Working Families Party. De Blasio, the mayor, they all supported Crowley, and she won. So if you mobilize your base, if you're integral to your community, if you go out and door knock and talk to people and speak to their issues, and most importantly, you live in the community, you stand a chance, and she demonstrated that.
Is it to be able to be taken by, let's say, people like yourself and that this might indicate we got an election in a couple months, or so, in November, right?
Well, myself, I'm not in the community, and I'm not out there door knocking, and it would be different if I were in the community.
Read the tea leaves. What's it mean for the election in November?
Well, I mean, it's clear that she will win in November, but she will be one person among 435. However, she was a Bernie supporter, an activist. She was, I believe, working early, maybe as a teenager, for Teddy Kennedy. Yeah, so she's part of that wing, that left liberal wing of the Democratic Party.
Bernie is a leader, and Bernie used to get in the election of the presidential election, when he came out of the dark, out of nowhere, and started giving talks all across the country, and he got hundreds of thousands of people accumulating just overnight at the word that he's going to be there and everything. He was very, very popular.
Because he was a good speaker. He's out there and he's talking.
Yeah, but he was up there against a real pro, Donald Trump. Donald Trump was able to get people all across the country.
Wait, let's backtrack for a second. He was up against Hillary Clinton. He was up against Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a BBC anecdote.
Okay.
BBC went to Southwest Pennsylvania and interviewed unemployed steel workers, miners in a bar, and said, who are you voting for? And these guys are all white. They're all voting for Trump. And then one guy said, he came to town, he rented a hall, he spoke to 6,000 people.
That's Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Yeah.
She came to town, she met with the town officials. That's the difference.
Hillary, yeah.
Yes. There was a he and a she.
I'm not comparing Hillary and Trump. I'm comparing Mr. Bernie Sanders
Bernie Sanders did the same thing. Bernie Sanders campaigned
to Mr. Trump as an inspiration, and he's got a huge base of people
Harold,
that are just going to die.
Both of them, both Trump and Sanders, actively campaigned.
Yes, and effectively.
And were out there in the hustings and effectively.
Well, Mr. Trump was a lot more successful than Mr. Sanders.
Because the Democratic,
he's got a base of loyal followers.
Democratic Party was weighted to the superdelegates. You didn't have to. Superdelegates were automatically the high officials in the Democratic Party, like Bill Clinton and Al Gore, and they had votes.
Yeah, I think
that was a serious problem.
Network of the
yes, and it did not work.
Well,
and
Mr.
he spent less than Hillary did.
Who?
Donald.
He
spent $1 billion.
Yeah, but he knew how to spend it effectively, I'll tell you.
He spent $1 billion. She spent $1.5 billion. She didn't campaign effectively. She got more, well, let's put it this way. She got more popular votes, 3 million.
That's true.
There's a huge disparity
that's true.
between the popular vote. But the key thing, you have to diagnose the constituency.
Well, Mr.
You have to target your vote. And you have to consider the Electoral College, which is unique in the United States.
Yeah.
No other country has this system.
That is. Where did that? You're a historian. Where did that come from? And what was the history of the Electoral College and everything?
It was designed
as distinct from the broader political history of the world.
It was designed to give Southern states with their slaves more representation.
It's in support of the institution of slavery?
Yes. Well, the South Carolina, the majority slave
that's
population
just a sin.
Well, each slave was counted, as you know from reading the Constitution, as 3/5 of a person. So if you have 100%...
history is a nightmare.
Well, no, I don't think it's a
Go
nightmare.
on,
It's
go
a
on,
nightmare.
yeah.
The 20th century is a nightmare.
of injustice.
But we're not even talking about the environment and
No, we
the
can't.
plastic in the ocean and the rest.
Okay, go on. We can talk about that. Yeah.
But,
okay,
but the
go on.
point is that too many people polluting the environment, destroying the planet, and so long as we're burning fossil fuels, it's all over. Okay, the rising sea levels, the melting of the glaciers,
Yeah,
etc.
but the Dow is up and everything's up.
The Dow is up because
employment is up.
because
Everything is up.
we going back to the beginning, the way the employment statistics are jiggered, they're manipulated.
Well, that's a thing, but okay.
That's
you
important.
don't think that's important?
There are people who've dropped out of the workforce. There are people who are counted as employed. If you work a part-time job twice a week, you're considered employed, which is absurd.
But the
Employment figures should consider full-time jobs with full benefits. Then it would be, unemployment would be 20, 25%. But that, it is not measuring actual unemployment
But
as it was 20 years ago.
With all due respect, the Trump army is huge and growing.
The reason
is it
why
not? It's very effective.
the point, here we go. Yeah. He put on a hat, he said, let's make America great again. That's the message. Who doesn't want to make America great again in the United States? Very few people. The majority
he's got
do.
A knack for it. It's like George M. Cohan
Because
could really
he spent
deliver
a lot,
song,
he spent a good deal
He's
of
a
time
pro.
on television.
Yeah, yeah. He knows how to manipulate the environment.
Exactly.
Well, that's what
he has that
that's
skill.
That's what the democratic process
and don't
is
forget
about
the
now,
media.
The media and the people.
The media built Trump up because they thought MSNBC and their ilk thought that the only person that Hillary could beat would be Donald. Other Democrats might have stood a better chance. That was the thinking. I'm not saying that was based on sound principles or knowledge. Yeah. It didn't work out that way. They built him up, and then she spent half the time knocking him down and also disparaging her constituency. And when you run for office, you do not disparage the political opposition's base.
It's not a winning proposition.
You don't call them deplorables. Yeah. That's nuts.
Yeah.
If you want to, you don't insult. I mean, you can perhaps go and insult the candidate that you're running against, but you don't insult the voters who support that candidate. I mean, it was extraordinarily myopic.
Not if you're wanting to attract actual votes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So they were thinking that, all right, they had a big fight, remember, in 2008. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton.
2008 was huge.
Yeah,
with
we're
the
gonna.
Economy
No, let me finish.
2008. Do you mean
2008?
Barack
Obama and Hillary Clinton, before the economy tanked in September of 2008.
That was a big.
There was a big fight between them. Dianne Feinstein said, "Look, stop fighting. You're ruining the party. Obama will run first, you run second." That was the plan.
Oh.
And she ran second in 2016 and lost because she was not addressing the needs of the working population, especially the white working population.
There was something about her that a lot of people didn't like.
Well,
a lot of people, even on the left, they didn't like her. There was something about her. Not the least of which they killed Gaddafi.
Well, we mentioned that. You mentioned that earlier.
Well,
the point.
Sensitive to that. I think Gaddafi was ahead of history's curve, and I think that was a disgusting thing that they.
Well, certainly disgusting the way he was killed.
Well, it was disgusting that his whole thing was undercut. Remember, the British came in 1812 and bombed and destroyed Washington because they were upset because they had won. A new thing across the ocean from the
No, Harold.
And they were angry because somebody else had set up something that was.
They did this in that's not the. That's not. That's not what.
1812.
No. 1814.
Well, 14.
That's important because earlier, at the beginning of the war.
They were angry.
Well, can I finish?
Sorry, but
I know the facts.
Okay.
Okay.
You do your history.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
1812. The United States invaded Canada, burned York, which is today's Toronto. So the British retaliated by coming and burning the White House and the Capitol.
With all due respect, they were also retaliating because we had taken and won the goddamn war against them. And they were upset because we had won. So Gaddafi had won against the West in a way that had relevance to the democratic use of the world and everything. And they were angry because he had something going that was historically ahead of what the United States had. Like the British were angry because we no longer were worshiping the crowned heads of Europe or the crowned heads of England. It was vengeance.
The United States,
and that when Hillary and Benghazi.
Even before the Constitution was written, the colonies, the ex-colonies, the 13 states, at least 12 of them, because Rhode Island did not participate in the Constitutional Convention.
Is that right?
We're planning. They only ratified in 1845. They had close ties to England, didn't want to jeopardize them, but Canada was always in the sights of the founding fathers to become part of the United States. And of course, Canada was run by Britain at that point. They'd taken control in 1763. And so the Americans were challenging them because the British were engaging in an embargo against Napoleon, which meant that American ships were commandeered by British naval vessels.
History is very complicated, isn't it?
Well, it's especially complicated if you can't finish one cannot finish one's thought or one's trying to read.
I'm terribly
right.
Sorry,
So the point being that they were impressing American seamen. They didn't recognize the right of Americans to have this kind of citizenship in the Navy, and that helped provoke the war. But the invasion of Canada by the United States first led to the invasion of 1814.
I didn't even realize that.
1813 and 14 of the British.
But
what you're saying is exactly what Trump said.
Yeah.
He said the same thing. He had his history wrong, completely wrong. He forgot who threw the first punch in this particular war. Same thing.
Well, no, but what was he talking about?
He was talking about 1814. The War of 1812.
He did. I didn't ever heard him say that. I missed.
You must have missed it.
That night or something.
You must have missed it. No, it was pretty. It was fairly embarrassing for the Canadians. But anyway, that's what happened. All right.
Well, okay.
So.
Okay. Well, then maybe I have a wrong reading of it, and I should really.
Well, you should just look up.
My thinking
you just go on. No, just go on.
Right.
Go on your search engine and type in Donald.
Isn't it wonderful? You can
Donald
do that?
Trump. Wanting to say that the British invaded us and burned Washington without noting the fact that we invaded Canada and burned York first. Well, York, which became Toronto. That's the old name.
Or it may have been a combination. They have it. Do you remember Alka-Seltzer? Do we still have Alka-Seltzer?
I don't know. I don't use that stuff.
And Alka-Seltzer's a thing.
If you eat the wrong foods, you're going to have indigestion. If you eat the right foods, you won't have indigestion.
No, but what I'm trying to say, remember, everything's advertising in a way. Everybody's advertising.
Well, I don't pay any attention. If it's advertised, I'm less likely to buy it.
No, but we live by advertising and advertising.
You live by it. I don't.
Alka-Seltzer used to say, do you remember? I can't remember the tune. There was a lovely little tune that they played or something. And it said, Alka-Seltzer is made up of many active ingredients. Do you remember that? It had a very
most of them bad
tune.
For you. Most
and
of them
we all
bad for
live
you.
by the tunes that the advertising people send out to us. And we're like puppets. They're communicating us.
Well, a lot of people are, but a lot of people aren't.
They have a combination of active ingredients. That's what it was, the Alka-Seltzer, and that's why it's better than bromo-seltzer.
So how we have descended from discussion of
global
to Alka-Seltzer.
Canada might have been an active thing, but the active thing really, the larger historical thing, was the British were angry because they lost the goddamn War of Revolution.
Well, of course they did, but they invested in...
And the United States was angry because Gaddafi had won out over for forces that were historically ahead, and so we wanted to attack him because they were angry that he had set up a system ahead of where we are. He was ahead of history's curve, like America was ahead of history's curve against the British. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
I don't know if it's true or not, but I think it could be.
Anyway, so in any case, you can't take anything for granted now with elections. We saw that with Trump.
Yeah.
And we see that with this recent election this past
There's one
8 days ago.
Does one cancel
excuse me,
the
a week
other?
Ago today.
Pardon? Yeah. Does one cancel the other?
No, it
Trump
just shows
influence is
shows a polarization,
Yeah.
an intensification of political arguments as the economy and the society implodes socially, because it's trying to control the world, and the rest of the world doesn't want to be controlled by the United States. The United States, the current regime, does not believe in a multilateral world. It believes it should call the shots, and the rest of the world.
It's like Britain in 1789.
Well, that's like Britain in 1900.
Losing the war to the yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
the point is that it's not going to happen. China and Russia have built their own alliance as a consequence of being freed from the control of Anglo-American capital, Russia.
Mr. Trump, our president, is about to meet with Putin, no?
Yes.
What does that mean? What does that mean that he's meeting the godfather
Putin
of
is Putin is a nationalist.
Union, yeah.
No, Putin is a capitalist and a nationalist, and Trump is a capitalist and a nationalist.
Yeah, he's not said anything
That's
bad
right.
about
So,
Putin that I can see.
right.
Nor so what does that mean for the election?
What it means is
politics?
That let's make America great again. We have to look at what's going on here and focus on that, and not on manipulating the rest of the world economically, as we've been doing. We have to put our economic house in order. And Trump thinks he can do that by producing products here and placing tariffs on everyone else, because he feels the competition is. Well, none of this is going to work.
Yeah,
this is sooner or later. This is all going to run out of steam. It already is running out of steam.
And what do you think about the fact that they're taking the children away from the people down in the border there?
Well, that was an absolute international disgrace. I went to the UN.
Is he going to play that
I went to the United Nations the day after its story broke, and my union head was there. Barbara Bowen, Randy Weingarten, who's the head of the UFT, was there, and other people.
Federation of Teachers?
Yes.
Yeah.
And a petition was delivered to the UN condemning what was being done with the children. You don't do that. It's psychologically destructive. It's very sick, very deranged, and was very bad in terms of its publicity, and the impact of the children is devastating. And I went on that march this past Sunday over the Brooklyn Bridge.
Was it big?
30,000 here.
And
There's
they had
more.
One in Washington too?
They had 700 all over the country.
Demonstrations?
A demonstration against the immigration.
No, 700 demonstrations?
700 cities had demonstrations.
Of sizable proportion.
Well, thousands.
Yeah.
But the point is, this candidate, Octavia Cruz, also called for ICE, the immigration, to be abolished, the Border Patrol, to abolish it. Yeah. And now other people are talking about at least reforming it. They have to.
They've got this border business going. It's also going in Europe, because remember all those Syrians streamed up? There were people coming in rafts across.
Well, you bomb people and then you make them refugees, and they come to the places that are not bombed.
Yeah,
Europe
Europe
and the U.S. were doing the bombings.
Yeah, okay. I know. Okay,
so that's why they're coming here.
Yeah,
or you destroy, in the case of Mexico, you're destroying the economy through NAFTA. The contrary of what...
I think it was more... okay, maybe that's something to do with it. You know, remember, who was the guy that ran back in the 90s?
You get rid of the tariffs. All right, let's finish, not jump all around.
No, but that guy
let's go back to NAFTA, then we'll go to
the
Ron.
Giant sucking sound.
Yes, of course.
What was his name?
Ross Perot.
Ross Perot had a huge following.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was threatened, and he dropped out of the election. But before he dropped out the first time, he was ahead of both Clinton and Bush. Now back to NAFTA. The claim was made by Bill Clinton, supported by all the living presidents except Reagan, whose Alzheimer's was sufficiently advanced at that point in 1993-94, that it would create full-time jobs with full benefits. Well, it was a disaster. All it did was destroy the Mexican economy and hurt the American economy by allowing the multinationals, the giant corporations, the transnationals, to overwhelm agriculture, especially in Mexico. And the Mexican peasantry suffered tremendously and moved to El Norte.
But you got this thing about the people coming from the sea coming over the border. And there's a lot of people who are taking exception with that in Europe and in United States as well.
But who did the bombing?
Well,
the Europeans and the Americans bombed the Middle East. The Americans put through NAFTA, which hurt Mexico tremendously.
And you've also got people coming up from Africa, where you have unlivable situations for so many people, and in desperation they're trying to come to where there
who
is
supports
a good
the
way
president of Rwanda? Bill Clinton. He's been in power, Kagame, since 2000. He was responsible for the massacre in the 90s during Bill Clinton's administration.
Yeah.
So that's just one example. That's why history is the DNA of human experience, and you can explain things.
Yeah.
There's a cause and effect. You can't just look at the effect and attack it as if it came out of the blue.
Yeah.
It's a product of various circumstances.
Okay. And what do you think about North Korea and his meeting and giving heads up to the fellow over there in North Korea, and the announcement of that, and now he's meeting with Putin, and what is the implication of that for the election that's coming up in a couple of 3 or 4 months?
Well, that makes Trump appear as a peace candidate. When domestically he's doing some horrible things, the imprisoning of infants and separating them from their parents being just one of the domestic horrors that he's perpetrated.
Yeah,
but on foreign policy,
is he thinking that out, or is that something he just made a big mistake?
No president thinks out. The president has ideas and he has advisors, and he weighs the advice and counsel of the people around him. That's how it's done with any leader.
He's pretty good at manipulating consciousness. He's a
We just already went back.
And he knows how to play the media.
We're rehashing this. Of course he does, because he had a TV show.
So what is? Yeah, well, that's not important. That's not unimportant. You know how to play with television and everything.
Well, obviously it's not important, but you also know how to have to go out there and work the crowd.
So what do you think is going to happen in the election in 3 months or 4 months? It's going to be in November now. That would be a first thing, and then we could look out beyond that. But
all things being equal, it's going to be a very... I don't think the Republicans are going to do as well as they did.
You really? Okay.
But on the other hand, if the Democrats don't get candidates that people can identify with, it's going to be... bad situation, and we have the Supreme Court vacancy to fill now.
Yeah, the ones he's mentioned are all just, there goes.
So the Democrats are going to filibuster. Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
We have Susan Collins of Maine who said she will not support anybody who does not support Roe versus Wade decision. So that makes it impossible for because the vote is right now in the Senate is 51-49. It's very close. It's that close.
I didn't realize that.
Yes.
Yeah. So what do you think? What do you predict for the next? What is it?
I don't have crystal balls. All I can do is look at the past. All I can say is it's only going to get worse here economically and socially for the majority of the people, because they have no meaningful platform that they can realize. Everything's going into the military. Our military budget is larger than it's ever been.
It's huge. It's unbelievable.
And they're more interested in controlling the world, and that's what happens with empires.
Is it
they socially implode.
Is it quasi-fascism? That's the thing I'd like to see.
Well,
it's
yes.
got the same appeal.
If you're black, it's always been fascist. Now it's increasingly for the whites as well. 9/11 was the pretext. Although Bill Clinton had the Anti-Terrorism Act, and then Bush had the Patriot Act, and the Patriot Act was strengthened by Obama in 2010, and so it goes.
So let's look beyond that then. Let's look beyond the actual presidential election.
Well, we have to look at the environment. He's going backwards on the environment and oil drilling and fossil fuels. That's going to kill us all.
Global warming. What about that?
They're not. They don't have.
Is that a big issue, or does Mr. Trump have a good issue on that, except to let the Keystone Pipeline go and all that kind of stuff?
He was the only. He took us out of the Paris Agreement. 193 people agreed on it.
Yeah.
Now it's 192. He took us out.
So how is that going to play in the election?
It doesn't play well in the world. And how will that play in the election?
Does it play well with this growing base of people who are just fanatically in support of him?
I don't know how much it's growing.
You don't think it is?
No.
It seems to me it's growing. He's getting a wide following.
Well,
and very effective.
There's also wide opposition.
Well, that's
700
true,
cities had demonstrations 2 days ago.
Well, that's about the
2 days ago. Yes.
Yeah, was that a
and that's his policies.
No,
and there were people who were complaining about the children, people complaining about the immigrants came together.
But one has a feeling that people complain about what he does, but he knows what he's doing, and what he's doing is
I don't know if he
in
knows
a political sense.
Up to a point.
Yeah.
He's on the right, but the right is not the country. The country has always been divided. The country has always been divided. We had a civil war which killed more people than all the wars we fought put together.
Yeah.
Before that, we had an American War for Independence in which John Adams famously said 1/3 was for it, 1/3 was not, and 1/3 was on the fence.
Yeah.
And those who didn't like it, many of them left for Canada and England. A large number of people given the population.
So what do you think? We were talking about this election a couple months off, and then the election that follows for years from that at the presidential level. What do you think is the outlook for that for this nation and in a political sense from what's going on?
Well, if we don't have anything cataclysmic or a false flag, something like the Gulf of Tonkin or 9/11.
Yeah.
We will see what happens here. But all I know is that everything is in a state of decline, socially, economically, and also here in New York City.
Yeah.
We had City University, where I work.
Yeah.
In 2000, we had 7,000 full-timers. 7,000 full-timers, yes, and 5,000 part-timers.
And
now, today, we have 14,000 part-timers.
Wait,
7,000.
as opposed to what? What did you have before? What's the 10? Less? More? What?
We have twice as many part-timers.
Oh, that
70%.
That would be
adjuncts.
Yeah,
adjuncts.
A lot of room
teaching
for
one
adjuncts,
or two.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Well, guest workers.
Yeah.
With few rights except for those who have the 3 years.
Is that indicative across the country?
Yes, but especially here.
Yeah, really.
Okay.
Especially in New York, you think, right?
Well, especially with the City University.
CUNY.
CUNY, 14,500 part-timers and 7,000 full-timers. Okay,
you're CUNY?
Right, and the student population has doubled since 2000.
I used to think of CUNY. I did a program. I aired it with
70%.
It was Mr. Murphy was the president. Of
Joe
CUNY.
Murphy in the 90s.
I know. I aired it, I think, tomorrow or something like that. It was way the hell back when he was still around. And CUNY used to be small. Now everywhere it's mushroom. CUNY's everywhere now. It's the biggest university in the world, I think. I'm not mistaken.
No, I don't think so.
They have a whole building over
I think
Puerto
this
Rican
is.
studies.
I think this is. Well,
CUNY's
I don't know.
Growing like
this
crazy.
is second. I think it's after the Illinois system. I think it's the second largest.
It was very small 20 years ago. It was just sort of like when Mr. Murphy was the president, it was relatively, they had the Socialist People's Conference, they had to put it at some other place downtown and everything like that. And now there's CUNY is everywhere. There's CUNY, they have a whole building of Puerto Rican studies.
Right, but the point is,
and there's somebody
CUNY
supporting CUNY for crying out loud.
CUNY subsists on the backs of adjunct labor.
Okay, is that the truth?
Well, of course it's the truth. 70% of the teaching is done by part-timers, often teaching at two campuses or at other campuses.
Those are like indentured servants or something, yeah.
Well, they have to behave.
Well, are you teaching?
I'm teaching.
You are.
Yes.
And are you respected and everything by the administration?
Well, the administration.
Are they teaching the professorship adequately and everything, or not?
I'm an adjunct.
You're an adjunct.
I'm an adjunct.
Oh, you're vulnerable.
Of course, but I have a 3-year contract,
Oh.
which gives me some grievance procedures.
Oh. Well, okay, but is it like that? How is it across the country? My daughter just got elected as the best teacher in all of the University of Minnesota.
Well, that is terrific. She's got a great because she had a great teacher as a father.
Well, that's true. Well,
that helps.
I would think it might have had a little bit more to do with her mother. It was really something else.
Let's put it this way: it was a reinforcing effort.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, the educational system. But so anyway, the political situation is, as always, an interesting thing to talk about and everything. And I don't know where it's all going, but it's. So are you? Let me put it this: there's an old line that you can always use. Are you up?
I don't know
Are you
what that
optimistic
means.
or pessimistic
for
the democratic principles
I'm genetically optimistic. I'm physically optimistic, but my intellect is pessimist. I'm just paraphrasing crudely Gramsci. Optimism of the will, pessimism of the intellect. So I don't see any favorable thing other than the mobilization of youth around democratic socialism that I see.
Yeah, I think youth.
Well,
do we have faith in the youth? They're coming.
Well, obviously, because they have to take command. They have to take command of their own destiny, and if they're going to involve themselves politically, they're going to support somebody who's interested in supporting jobs, education, health care, and housing.
You've got a huge base of people who are going to support Mr. Trump, right? No matter what. They're just.
I don't know if it's a huge base.
Where is the base of support for an alternative to Mr. Trump? Let's say 3 months from now, or a couple of years.
Well, we're talking in 2020. That's a good question.
Yeah.
When we're talking 2018, that's another question.
Yeah, right.
And I don't know if
we've only got a couple minutes, but maybe you could enlighten us with your understanding historically.
Well,
we only got about
people have to address
haiku.
People have to address needs, jobs, education. I'm a politician. People running for jobs, education, healthcare, housing, the environment. Those are the 5 issues.
What
jobs, full-time jobs with benefit,
which are going by automation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Healthcare, free healthcare. She was there for free healthcare. Okay, the Democratic Socialists, Bernie and
the young lady.
Yes.
Yeah.
Octavio Cruz. And housing, and that's a real problem in New York City. A one-bedroom in New York City is 120% more expensive than it is upstate.
Yeah, and it's going up. How did they manage to get to things like NYCHA, where they get low-cost housing for thousands and thousands of people?
And it's in horrible conditions.
No, they're not.
It's 400,000. They just had a big expose. All the lead poisoning of the children, 800, 900 children. Well, you have to pick up the newspaper and read it.
No,
daily.
NYCHA is a big success.
I don't know if it's success. It's
well, I'm saying.
Well, then maybe your particular building, but most buildings in the Bronx and elsewhere are not in that good condition. There are 400,000 people in it.
That such a thing can exist across the nation for the poor people, where you can have housing, where you got a lock on the door, and somewhat relative way in which you can live. Rather than just dying in the street. So we're coming out to the end. And, okay, Tony, thank you. Always good. This is Antoney Gronowicz, former Green Party candidate for mayor of New York City, as you can see, and someone very worth listening to about things political and all kinds of other moral and questions regarding the human condition. Thank you for viewing. We'll be coming right back again tomorrow. Tony, thank you again for such a very
You're very welcome, Harold. It's always a pleasure to be entertained.
To Tony.
Okay.
And thanks a lot to our crew here who puts things so together. There's such competence being demonstrated by the youthful people putting this program together, and we thank them all in their multitude. Thank you.